There's been a lot of Marvel Cinematic Universe hate over the past few years, a lot of it unfortunately justified, but I think it's often easy to overlook how impactful something is when you're living through it. And for many of us, it's probably hard to imagine what the film industry was like pre-MCU, but it really was extremely different. And even with the MCU progressively losing its cultural importance and mainstream appeal, the impact of its decade-long success is still felt in the film and television industries, for better and for worse. I remember being an impressionable 8-year-old seeing Iron Man in theaters for the first time, and it was one of the defining moments of my childhood, as I wasn't quite old enough to have seen X-Men or Spider-Man in theaters, so Iron Man was really my first in-theater superhero experience, and I absolutely loved it. You had a charismatic lead, great action, and a truly interesting plot, which was more than enough to earn my fandom. And you better believe I was going to be knocking down the doors to see each of his subsequent appearances on the big screen. As I grew attached to Tony as a character, and grew up myself while watching his progression unfold, which gave me a truly sentimental bond with the character, and I'm sure I'm far from the only person who grew up with the MCU in this fashion. So I think starting on this note with Iron Man was a huge first step for the MCU, as Iron Man is one of the best casting choices of all time. And while Robert Downey Jr. was seen as damaged goods in 2008, and Iron Man was kind of always a B-level Marvel character, this perfect marriage between character and actor, in conjunction with a great script, was the heart and soul of the MCU. But there's another important thing to note in regards to my theater experience with Iron Man, and that's the fact that I didn't stay for the post-credit scene. In fact, no one did. Everyone just got up as soon as the credits started rolling, and the post-credit scene, while it may seem small, was a huge game changer once people started to catch on. And while the MCU was not the first to use it, they certainly popularized it. You see, the post-credit scene essentially serves as a preview or sneak peek for what is going to happen next in the franchise. And yes, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what about trailers? Don't they do the same thing? And yes, they technically do, but with the post-credit scene, you get to see an actual scene that's typically just been plucked right out of the next upcoming film, and you're amongst the first people to see it, so you get to live react to it with an audience of MCU fans. And this addition of the post-credit scene, in a way, brought back what trailers used to be. You see, back in the day before the internet, your first time seeing a trailer for a movie was actually in the theater during the previews. But with everyone having access to trailers as soon as they drop on YouTube, previews in the theater had lost their importance. But the post-credit scene in a way filled this void, as it preceded any trailers for upcoming Marvel films, and you had to be in the theater to experience it. This also is an effective way to get people to buy into your franchise. If you really love one character, let's say Iron Man for example, whatever pops up in the post-credit scene of an Iron Man film is likely to gain your interest, and will plant seeds for your fandom to grow from just one character to an entire franchise. And this is what the MCU did really organically over time when it was on the come up. You really loved Iron Man, so you went to see Iron Man 2. And then you went to see the Avengers. And by the end of the Avengers, you were a fan of a few Marvel characters, so you went to see their subsequent films. And it just kinda grew and grew from there. The post-credit scene was one of the biggest tools the MCU had in creating fan anticipation for its upcoming projects. And the film industry is an industry that copies when something succeeds, so this is why the DCEU, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, really any franchise that was planning on making more movies, followed suit and started using post-credit scenes with a great regularity. I mean, even M. Night Shyamalan did this at the end of Split, as he connected the film to Unbreakable with the post-credit scene. The MCU truly started a massive wave of almost every film at least needing the potential to branch off into sequels or some kind of universe. And this both has its positives and negatives. While yes, it is fun to experience a cinematic universe and grow with it, having to connect to other films and other characters can sometimes pigeonhole movies and creatively stifle them, as there might simply be too many cooks in the kitchen and too many plot points to hit. And this can be seen outside and inside of the MCU, as films such as Avengers Age of Ultron, while not bad, did certainly suffer from trying to do and set up too much. The MCU also massively impacted pop culture by making it cool to be a nerd. You see, back when I was growing up, if you were big into comic books, or anime, or really anything nerdy, it was essentially a death sentence to your odds of being popular. But the MCU made it cool to have a ton of knowledge about the comics, as you could kind of serve as the person who could tell your friends what might happen in the next film. And the MCU's popularity definitely drove plenty of people to pick up their first comic books, as seeing something adapted on the big screen could certainly generate interest in what it was adapted from in the first place. So now it's cool to like superhero stuff, or have knowledge of the comics, or to have massive Funko collections. And the MCU spearheaded this in many ways, as it brought what was seen as nerdy into the mainstream. And audiences in pop culture realized that they had been missing out on a lot of cool shit. And when I say nerd, I don't mean that disparagingly, by the way. I am a self-identifying nerd, and I'm very proud of it. But this new nerd culture created the opportunity for even more non-Marvel and non-DC comic material to be adapted into movies or series. Take The Boys or Invincible, for example. These shows have provided some of the best superhero content we've ever seen. And you know what they both have in common? I had never heard of their comic series until I watched the shows. So the fact that the MCU made it cool to be somewhat nerdy, it allowed for studios to be able to take a chance on more obscure comic content, as it had a proven track record of success now. I mean, if we're all being honest, if not for the massive MCU-driven superhero craze, there's no shot something like The Boys gets greenlit. It just would have been seen as far too big of a risk. Stepping outside of pop culture impact and influencing studios to create cinematic universes, Marvel also helped shape how villains were used in films going forward. You see, villains largely became a footnote in a lot of MCU films. Even some of the best Marvel films, such as Guardians of the Galaxy, have villains that you might be hard-pressed to remember. And this is because most of them are one-offs. And since they're one-offs, their backstories and character arcs get put on the back burner so that the reoccurring characters can progress properly. Really, there just needs to be some kind of obstacle for our reoccurring characters to get past, and oftentimes the villain simply serves as this obstacle. This need for a hurdle to climb also led to the rise of giant CGI third act battles against nameless armies, as these nameless armies serve as a great way to visually show our heroes overcoming something, without having to put in effort into the things that they're overcoming. And this may seem demeaning, but it's not meant to be. It's a logical thing to do, and it has been done a lot. Hell, Deadpool 2 even made fun of this CGI fight trend in its third act, before giving us a kind of crappy CGI fight between Colossus and the Juggernaut. All in all, the Marvel Cinematic Universe impacted the film industry in many ways, some positive, some negative. Though I'm not here today to make a statement on whether or not the MCU left the film industry better than it found it, I just want to draw attention to how massive its impact truly was, especially as the fandom is slowly dying off. The film world will truly never be the same, and it's kind of crazy to think that there's new generations who will never know what the pre-MCU times were like. If you made it this far, thank you for watching this analysis of the impact of the MCU. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please consider dropping a like and subscribing, and if you agree, disagree, or just have strong MCU thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments.